Hey guys, tonight we're plunging into the darker, dirtier corners of history, the kind of places where you can almost smell the past through your screen. Close your eyes and imagine this. You're standing in the glittering court of King Henry VIII. Velvet robes, golden goblets, feasts that last for hours. Sounds lavish, right? But then there's you. You're not here for the turkey legs or the minstrels. No, your job, something a little more personal. You are the groom of the stool, and yes, that is exactly what it sounds like. You assist the king in his most, shall we say, delicate of bodily functions. You probably won't survive this, not because it's life-threatening, but because your pride might shrivel up and die by lunchtime. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Drop it in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You kneel by the ornate, padded commode, the royal toilet, if you will. The groom of the stool wasn't just a servant. You were part of the king's inner circle, privy to his most vulnerable moments. You would assist him with everything involved in going to the bathroom. And in Tudor England, the king's bowels were national business. His health, or lack thereof, was a state concern. So you weren't just wiping a royal behind. You were ensuring the stability of the realm. Kind of makes your job feel important, doesn't it? Or not. This wasn't seen as demeaning at the time. In fact, the groom often became a trusted advisor, privy to political secrets shared during these intimate moments. Historians still argue whether this position came with genuine influence or if it was more ceremonial. But one thing's for sure, it was hands-on. The job involved more than just waiting by the chamber pot. You prepared linen cloths, perfumes, and even provided conversation during the act. And given Henry's well-documented digestive issues, likely from his meat-heavy, fiber-light diet, you probably spent more time in that lavatory chamber than you'd like. Imagine trying to maintain eye contact, nodding along to the king's military plans, while simultaneously holding your breath. You'd need nerves of steel and a strong stomach. It wasn't all pomp and glory in the royal court. And yet, bizarrely, the groom of the stool was a highly coveted position. It meant daily unfiltered access to the king, and with that came power. Appointments to lucrative posts, political favors, they all passed through the groom's hands, quite literally. You might think, who would want this job? Well, in a world where proximity to power was everything, plenty of nobles did. But remember, there were risks. One misstep, one poorly timed joke, and you could find yourself stripped of title and dignity, or worse. After all, the Tudors weren't known for their tolerance of error. And considering the rumors about the king's violent moods, every bathroom trip could feel like walking a tightrope over a pit of lions. Here's a quirky tidbit. The royal commode itself was known as the close stool, and it was an elaborate piece of furniture, sometimes upholstered in velvet, because, of course, it was. The king deserved comfort, even while answering nature's call. And while we're on the subject of historical oddities, there's still debate about whether the groom also had to examine the king's output to assess his health. Some records suggest this was part of the duty. Others say that's a bit of an exaggeration from scandal-hungry chroniclers. But you'd probably rather not know. So as you trudge through your day in the Tudor court, you may carry yourself with dignity. You might even remind yourself that you hold more influence than most courtiers. But when night falls and you lie awake in your chamber, the scent of lavender water still clinging to your hands, you might wonder if this was really the path to glory your family envisioned. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again. Maybe try not to think about the fact that even with your high position, you can't exactly brag about your day's work at the tavern. You can almost feel the relief as you step out of the Tudor palace and into the sweltering streets of ancient Rome. Though I wouldn't recommend breathing in too deeply, because now your career path has landed you in the Roman Follonica, the ancient world's most charming laundromat. And by charming, I mean horrifically pungent. Your job: to clean soiled garments by stomping them in large stone vats filled with human urine. Yes, you heard that right. The Romans, in their infinite inventiveness, discovered that the ammonia in urine made for an excellent stain remover. And congratulations, you've just become the human agitator in this ancient spin cycle. You trudge barefoot into the vat, the lukewarm liquid swirling around your ankles. It squishes between your toes, sending up waves of eye-watering fumes that cling to your nostrils like an unwanted guest. You might want to hold your breath. But trust me, it's not a long-term strategy in this job. Historians still argue whether Follonica workers were slaves, free citizens, or somewhere in between. Some inscriptions suggest that fullers had a trade guild, granting them a degree of respectability, while other records paint them as the lowest of the low. Either way, you wouldn't be winning any popularity contests at the Roman bathhouse. And here's a quirky fact to cheer you up. The Romans had public urinals where passers-by could contribute to your workplace inventory. In fact, Emperor Vespasian even imposed a tax on urine collection. That's right. The phrase, "money doesn't stink," is often attributed to him, since he was happy to tax this liquid gold flowing into the Fulanaika industry. You continue stomping the soaked tunics sloshing beneath your feet, imagining how much worse it must have been in the summer heat. The Fulanaika wasn't just about the stomp and soak either. After the urine treatment, clothes were scrubbed with fuller's earth, rinsed, hopefully, and then brushed with sulfurous substances to bleach them, turning this into a multi-sensory experience you'd never forget, no matter how much you might want to. And the gossip. Oh, you heard it all. Being elbow deep in the dirty laundry of Rome's citizens meant you had front row access to scandalous stains, some figurative, some very literal. Perhaps you'd daydream about blackmailing a senator after finding suspicious traces on his toga. But who are we kidding? You'd probably just keep stomping. Of course, your health wasn't high on anyone's list of priorities. The constant exposure to ammonia fumes damaged lungs and skin. And barefoot, the perfect recipe for open sores and infections. But hey, at least you weren't in the mines. Small comforts, right? Oh, and remember the royal groom of the stool from earlier. At least he had perfumes and silks. You, my friend, get to trudge home smelling like a one-man latrine, and no one sending you fragrant oils to make it better. But don't despair completely. Some historians suggest Fullers might have enjoyed a rough camaraderie, a shared sense of endurance in the face of well buckets of human waste. There's even a theory that they formed their own clubs with drinking rituals and jokes that probably lost a lot in translation, but still involved the phrase, "bottoms up." As night falls over the Roman streets and you scrape the crust of dried urine from your legs, you might reflect on the resilience of the human spirit, or just fall into bed, grateful you survived another day without passing out in the vat. Sleep tight laundry, warrior. Tomorrow more togas await your tender care. You wake up to the clang of a bell, the chill of damp morning air biting at your skin as you pull on your patched tunic. But this isn't Rome anymore. You're in medieval England now, and your title, Gong Farmer. A fancy name for someone whose job is quite literally to shovel human waste from cesspits. The glamour never ends, does it? Gong farmers worked under the cover of darkness, not because it was mysterious or stealthy, but because the stench was so overpowering. The city demanded it be done while most were asleep. Plus, let's face it, no one wanted to see you at work. The pits themselves were deep, filled with layers of excrement, food waste, and whatever else the townsfolk deemed unworthy of their notice. You lower yourself into the darkness, lantern flickering shovel at the ready. The job required bravery, a strong stomach, and most importantly, the ability to climb out before you suffocated. Some pits were so deep and poorly ventilated that farmers fainted, or worse. Historians still argue whether gong farmers were reasonably paid specialists or desperate souls with no better options. Either way, the pay was higher than most laborers. Hazard pay, you could say. Not that the extra coin would win you a table at the local tavern. Most people avoided you like the plague, literally, since cesspits were often hotbeds for disease. And rats. Oh, they were your constant companions. Fat, bold, and utterly fearless, they'd scramble over your boots, fighting you for the choicest morsels. You learn quickly not to flinch. There's no room for squeamishness down here. You shovel by the lantern's glow, the slime oozing into your boots as you remind yourself this job is essential. Without gong farmers, the streets would flood with filth, spreading disease faster than rumors in the market square. Here's a quirky tidbit for your troubles. In some towns, the waste you collected wasn't entirely useless. It was transported outside the city walls to fertilize fields, giving new meaning to the phrase, "Life comes from death." And yes, some farmers turned this into a lucrative side hustle, selling the sludge to desperate agriculturalists. You too might dream of such an empire, though you'll need to climb out of the pit first. It wasn't just the smell you battled. There were dangers lurking beneath the surface. Hidden sharp objects, glass bones, and sometimes the bodies of the unfortunate or the unwanted. You learn to prod carefully before digging deep. One wrong move, and you could slice open your foot, inviting infection into your already battered body. You might catch yourself wondering in your more philosophical moments how the nobles of the land slept soundly above while you labored in the filth below. Then again, you weren't here for politics. You were here because someone had to be. And yet, there was a grim pride among gong farmers. You kept the city running. You made the streets walkable, the wells drinkable. Without you, civilization would crumble into chaos, or at least it would stink a lot more than it already did. At the end of your shift, as you heave your slop cart down winding alleyways toward the river or fields, you might hum a tune. Maybe a dark little rhyme passed down from older farmers like Night and Dung Rats and Song Shovel, deep, but not for long. It's a hard life, but it's yours. And tomorrow night, you'll pick up the shovel again. You'd think, after a night elbow, deep in medieval cesspits, the universe might give you a break. But no, now you're a rat catcher in Victorian London. And if you thought the rats in the gong farmer's pit were bad, well, welcome to the capital of vermin. armed with little more than a burlap sack, a stick, and a few battered traps, you make your way through damp alleys, crumbling tenements, and beneath the city streets. The rats here, they're not shy. They don't run from you. They charge, fat, clever, and carrying every disease known to man. These rats are more than a nuisance. They're a plague with fur and teeth. Your job is to catch them. Alive, preferably, since rat catchers often sold them for sport rat baiting, being a popular, if grim, form of entertainment. Imagine standing in a packed tavern, basement, as dogs tore into a pit, swarming with dozens of rats, onlookers cheering. You'd get paid twice for the same rats. Efficiency at its finest. Historians still argue whether rat catchers were seen as folk heroes or filthy outcasts. Some became minor celebrities, boasting about their catches in the papers, while others lurked in the shadows, mistrusted and avoided. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some rat catchers kept decoy rats, tame rats, they'd release into a home or shop just to scare the owners into hiring them. Ethical, questionable. Profitable, absolutely. You edge your way down into the sewers, the lantern light casting twitching shadows on the dripping brick walls. You hear them before you see them, a chittering, scratching mass. You steel yourself. You'll need to act fast, thrusting your stick into clusters of them, shoving them into your sack before they can scatter or bite. And bite they do. Your hands bear the scars, infected wounds that never quite heal. But you can't afford gloves. Gloves are for gentlemen, not for men like you. You joke with yourself that the rats are just your co-workers punching in for the night shift. Of course, the city doesn't make your job any easier. Piles of rotting food, open drains, and crumbling foundations create the perfect breeding ground. You sometimes wonder if you're fighting a losing battle. There's a theory that rat catchers secretly let a few escape on purpose. Job security, after all. But the worst part, the smell. The rats bring it with them, a sour, greasy odor that seeps into your clothes, your skin, your very soul. No amount of soap can scrub it out. And when you finally collapse into your cot at the end of the day, you swear you hear the scratching still echoing in your dreams. You might laugh at the absurdity of it all. People look at you with disgust, yet they rely on you to keep their homes rat-free. It's a thankless, endless job. And you'll keep at it. Because in a city like London, there's never a shortage of rats, or of the brave or desperate willing to chase them. You blink, and suddenly you're no longer in the gaslit alleys of London. The air is dry, thick with incense, and something far less pleasant. You're in ancient Egypt now, standing inside a low, cool chamber carved into the rock. Your job, embalmer's assistant, and you'd better get used to the smell of death. The art of mummification wasn't just sacred, it was essential. The Egyptians believed the preservation of the body ensured the soul's passage into the afterlife. You're the one tasked with making sure that body is well ready for eternity. Your first task of the day: removing the internal organs. You grab your bronze hook, a tool both delicate and brutal, and begin the process of extracting the brain through the nostrils. You might gag a little, but you learn quickly to breathe through your mouth. Not that it helps much. Historians still argue about the exact recipes used in embalming. Some texts describe the use of natron, a naturally occurring salt, while others reference mysterious resins whose exact compositions are lost to time. One thing is certain: the process was meticulous and labor-intensive. After the brain, you move on to the viscera, the lungs, liver, stomach, intestines, all carefully removed and placed in canopic jars. Each organ is protected by a specific deity, and it's your job to handle them with reverence, even as you're elbow deep in decay. And here's a quirky tidbit to make your day: not every embalmer was held in high regard. Some were accused of theft, slipping jewelry off the bodies they prepared. There are records of embalmers being punished severely for such crimes, proving that even in death, you couldn't fully escape the reach of the law. But you're an honest worker. Mostly, and besides, the smell alone is punishment enough. The combination of rotting flesh, sticky resins, and pungent oils clings to you, seeps into your pores, and refuses to let go. You might fantasize about perfume, but in truth, nothing masks it. You labor in silence, save for the soft chants of the priests performing rituals to guide the soul. You might whisper prayers yourself, if only to soothe your own nerves. It's easy to believe the dead are watching you in this place of shadows. Sometimes the families hover, demanding perfection. They want their loved one to look serene, flawless, even as the body bloats and stiffens. It's your job to make it so. You paint the lips stuff, the cheeks arrange, the limbs, giving the illusion of peaceful slumber. And yet, despite the grimness, you feel a certain pride. You are preserving a person's passage to the afterlife. Without you, their soul might wander, lost, unanchored. At least, that's what you tell yourself when the nights stretch long and the silence of the tomb presses in on you. As you clean your tools and prepare for the next client. Because in ancient Egypt, death is never on vacation. You might ponder your place in the grand scheme, You're not a priest, not a noble, not a warrior. But you hold the key to eternity. Not bad for a kid from the outskirts of Thebes. Just try not to dwell too long on the fact that your lifespan is unlikely to rival your mummy's. Occupational hazards. You know, you trade the dry, suffocating air of Egyptian tombs for the damp, oozing bogs of 18th century England. Congratulations, you're now a leech collector. Your mission, wade waist deep into stagnant, muddy waters and collect bloodthirsty leeches by letting them feast on your exposed skin. No gloves, no fancy tools, just you, your bare legs, and hundreds of eager, slimy customers. In the age of bloodletting, leeches were prized medical tools thought to cure everything from headaches to hysteria. Doctors adored them. Patients feared them. And you were the essential middleman, or middle victim more like. You trudge into the marsh at dawn when the leeches are most active and stand still as statues. The trick is to let them latch on quickly rather than thrash around like a rookie, because nothing gets you bitten in the wrong places faster than panic. Historians still argue whether the leech collectors were mostly women, old men, or desperate children. Portraits and reports from the era seem to show a mix of all three, their legs pocked with scars and sores, often suffering from chronic anemia. And who could blame them? You lose as much blood as you collect. And here's a quirky tidbit to cheer you up. Some leech collectors supposedly smeared their legs with animal blood to attract more leeches. Clever, maybe. Horrifying, definitely. But standing still in cold water for hours carries other risks. Hypothermia infections, gangrene if you're unlucky. You shuffle from bog to bog, sometimes traveling miles, for the promise of a better, fatter catch, and all for a few pence per jar. Your hands constantly submerged prune and split open. You develop a shuffle, a stiff-legged gait from the swelling, and bites, earning you the nickname marsh walkers among locals. They joke that you look like you're already half dead, which isn't far from the truth. And still, the demand for leeches never wanes. Barber surgeons, apothecaries, and even royalty clamor for them. Some collectors grow wealthy, or at least less poor, by selling leeches in bulk. But for most, the job is a cycle of blood loss, cold feet, and the constant creeping fear that one day you'll slip beneath the muck and never come up again. You might hum a tune to pass the time, something like leeches on my legs again, biting through the fog and fen. Drain me dry, leave me thin. Tomorrow I'll be back again. Because of course you will. There's always another marsh, another jar, to fill, another bite to endure. The bog fades, and you find yourself standing beneath a blistering sun in a reeking tannery yard. The year, sometime in the grimy expanse of pre-industrial Europe. Your new title: Tanner's Apprentice, or more honestly, the unfortunate soul tasked with transforming raw animal hides into leather. And if you thought leeches were bad, you haven't yet stood ankle deep in dog feces. Yes, part of your daily task involves soaking animal skins in vats of stale urine and dog dung. Why? Because the enzymes in these fragrant substances help soften the hides and remove hair. You stir the bubbling mix with a long stick, unless you're unlucky, in which case you wade in barefoot. The stench is indescribable, a sour, choking cocktail of decay, excrement, and chemicals that clings to you long after you leave. Tanners were considered vital, but detestable. Historians still argue whether they lived on the outskirts of towns by choice or were driven there by disgusted neighbors. What's certain is that the tanneries were always downstream. No one wanted their drinking water fouled by your trade. Here's a quirky tidbit to wrinkle your nose. The hides weren't just soaked in filth. They were pounded, stretched, and scraped over weeks, sometimes months. And when the weather turned hot, the smell ripened into something that could knock out a passing ox. You scrape the flesh off hides with your dull, rusted blade, swatting at flies that swarm in clouds. The repetitive motion blisters your hands, and the constant exposure to chemicals erodes your skin, giving you cracked, leathery hands to match your product. And the maggots, oh, they're your constant co-workers, wriggling in and out of hides that have been left too long in the sun. But leather is precious. Without it, soldiers wouldn't have armor, cobblers wouldn't have shoes, and merchants wouldn't have belts to hold their coin purses. You take pride, grimy, smelly pride in your work. You might even brag that your leather ends up on the king's saddle, though no one invites you to the palace to confirm it. The job comes with its hazards. The fumes erode your lungs. The sharp tools slice your flesh. The constant filth invites infections that never quite heal. And the townsfolk, they cross the street when they see you coming. Yet, in your rare moments of rest, you might look upon a finished piece of supple, gleaming leather and feel something close to satisfaction. You made that. You and your sore arms and your battered dignity. Still, as the sun dips below the tannery walls and you wash your hands, knowing the smell won't fade, you might daydream about a different life. Maybe a merchant or a scribe. Anything that doesn't require daily dunks and dog droppings. But for now, there are more hides to soak, and the dung waits for no one. You might think you've finally escaped the stink, but tonight, your job shifts from the foul to the downright eerie. You're now a sin eater, a figure of folklore and fringe history in rural Britain. Your purpose: to sit at the bedside of the freshly deceased, eating a ceremonial meal placed upon their chest, believed to absorb the sins of their soul. No pressure, right? You sit in the flickering candlelight, the corpse beneath you, stiff cold, and let's be honest, not exactly appetizing company. The family watches from the shadows, clutching their rosaries, whispering prayers, but they do not approach you. No, you are a pariah, tolerated only because someone has to do the job. And that someone is you. The meal, usually stale bread and a cup of cheap ale. Hardly a feast, but the symbolism is heavy. Every bite you take is a bite of sin, an act of spiritual recycling. And while this practice isn't exactly endorsed by the church historians, still argue whether sin eaters were seen as necessary folk heroes or heretics, you fulfill a role no one else dares. Here's a quirky tidbit to chill your spine. Some villages believed the sin eater carried a literal burden of evil, growing heavier and darker with every funeral. You might laugh it off, but on nights like these, sitting alone with a stiffening corpse, you feel the weight in your bones. You eat quickly, more out of survival than ceremony. The bread is tough, the ale bitter, but worse is the silence. Sometimes the families whisper behind closed doors, warning their children not to make eye contact with you, lest your curse rub off. You exist in the liminal space between the living and the dead, both necessary and despised. There's no glory here, no wages worth mentioning. Sometimes you're paid in bread alone, other times in pitying glances, or if you're lucky, a handful of coppers. But deep down in the quiet recesses of your soul, you tell yourself you're doing a service. You're granting the departed peace, ensuring they pass clean into the next world. Or so the legend goes. Still on the long, lonely walk home through fog-shrouded moors, you can't help but glance over your shoulder. Maybe the villagers are right. Maybe the souls do cling to you. You feel them in the hollow ache of your stomach, in the shiver down your spine. But tomorrow, there will be another body, another crust of bread. And you'll be there eating sins so others can sleep soundly. And now, you trade the whispers of the sin eater for the jeers and fearful stares of the executioner. You stand at the scaffold, your axe gleaming in the sun, the crowd below both repulsed and fascinated by you. You are the hand of justice, or so they say. But in truth, you live a lonely double life, caught between duty and exile. Executioners were both feared and needed. Historians still argue whether they were social outcasts by law or simply by tradition. But one thing is clear: you don't get invited to many dinner parties. You may swing the axe by day, but by night you drink alone, your face hidden behind a hood, even in the tavern's darkest corner. Your days start early, preparing the tools of your trade. The axe must be sharp, the rope strong, the block steady. You inspect each carefully, for mistakes are not tolerated. A clean execution is your badge of honor. A messy one, well, the crowd might turn on you. And in these blood-soaked arenas, the crowd is a beast you never want to anger. And here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some executioners developed elaborate rituals to steady their nerves, including talking to the condemned, offering them ale, or even whispering last-minute jokes. It wasn't kindness. It was to keep the condemned calm, ensuring they didn't flail or resist, which made your job harder. You never sleep well before an execution day. You lie awake, replaying the steps in your mind. There are whispers that executioners are cursed, their souls stained by the blood they spill. Maybe that's why your dreams are haunted by faces, some peaceful, some vengeful. And yet, despite the revulsion, you serve a vital role in society. Without you, justice is incomplete. You remind the people of the consequences of treason, theft, or heresy. You are the king's sword in human form, but the toll is heavy. Your home sits outside town walls. Children dare each other to knock on your door. Merchants refuse to sell you goods, directly forcing you to send your assistant, who's only slightly less hated. And yet you endure. You've carved a life from this shadow. You tell yourself it's just a job, that the heads rolling at your feet are the wages of crime, not your burden to bear. But deep down, you know the blood never really washes off. You might think your grim career path couldn't get any worse. But oh, how history loves to surprise you. Now you walk the death-soaked streets of plague-ridden Europe, donned in your heavy, ominous, beaked mask. You are the infamous plague doctor, a figure straight out of nightmares. Your beaked mask, stuffed with aromatic herbs, rose petals, and spices, is supposed to protect you from the miasma, the bad air, that at the time was believed to spread the Black Death. Historians still argue whether plague doctors were genuinely seen as healers or merely as symbols of inevitable death. After all, your appearance rarely brought comfort to the sick. More often, your presence meant their last rites had begun. You trudge through narrow streets, the stench of decay seeping through even your layers of waxed cloth. The boots, gloves, and hat are meant to keep you safe. But you know the truth. Most plague doctors didn't survive long, and those who did often found themselves as despised as they were needed. Here's a quirky tidbit. The beaked mask wasn't just for filtering air. It also made you look like a menacing bird, which some believed could frighten off evil spirits. Though, if anything, the sight of you was what frightened the locals. You carry your staff poking at patients from a safe distance, examining the buboes that swell beneath their armpits and groins. There is no cure. Your treatments are more theater than medicine. Lancing boils, bleeding, applying pastes of dubious origin. And yet you do what you can. You record the names of the dead, assist with the gruesome processions to mass graves, and sometimes, yes, you even console the dying. Despite the horror, you see flashes of humanity in these moments. A mother's final lullaby, a father's trembling prayer. At night, you burn your clothing, or at least try to. The smell of sickness clings to your skin, your hair, your very soul. You eat alone, drink alone, sleep alone, if you can sleep at all. And always you wonder, will tomorrow be the day the mask stops protecting you? Will the ache in your throat be the first sign? You stare into your cracked mirror, your masked reflection staring back, and you remind yourself, you are the last hope. Even if the hope is as thin as the smoke drifting from the plague pyres. From the suffocating streets of plague-era Europe, you slide quite literally into the narrow, soot-choked chimneys of Victorian London. You are now a child chimney sweep, perhaps no older than 7. Your small frame, the perfect size to wriggle into flues barely wider than your shoulders. Your day begins before dawn, your master rousing you with a kick or a shout. You swallow your coughs. There's no sympathy in this business. Armed with a brush, a scraping tool, and the raw toughness of a child forced into adulthood far too soon, you clamber up into the dark, claustrophobic shaft. Historians still argue whether the sweep masters truly believed they were giving you a trade, or if they simply saw you as disposable labor. Whatever the case, you have little choice in the matter. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some children, known as climbing boys, were encouraged to sing while inside the flue. The song would signal they were still alive and still moving. If the singing stopped, well, the master might have to fetch a stick, or worse, a rope, to pull your lifeless body free. You push upward your skin scraping against jagged bricks, the soot filling your eyes, your throat, your lungs. You learn to hold your breath, to squint just enough to see, but not enough to let in too much grit. The heat burns your bare feet, but shoes slow you down. And your master won't have that. You cough, but quietly. Noise brings punishment. And besides, no one in the Grand London homes wants to hear the suffering child cleaning their hearth. Out of sight, out of mind. And yet the dangers aren't limited to suffocation or burns. Chimney collapses happen. Hidden nails tear at your flesh. And then there's the dreaded sweeps cancer, a deadly condition that affects chimney sweeps exposed long-term to soot, particularly in sensitive areas. You cling to what little comfort you can. A tune you hum in the darkness. The warm rush of daylight. When you finally crawl free. Even the rare kind word from a housemaid. At the end of the day, you return to your master's filthy lodgings, your body aching, your lungs rattling with every breath. You share the floor with other soot-blackened children, your skin rubbed raw from attempts to scrub yourself clean in cold, soapy water. But you survive, and in your world, that's a victory. Tomorrow, another chimney, another climb, and maybe, just maybe, one more day clinging to life in the shadows of the city's grandest mansions. You wipe the soot from your eyes, only to find yourself gripping the handles of a heavy wooden cart under the cover of darkness once more. This time, you're a night soil collector in the rapidly industrializing cities of the 19th century. Your task, collecting the contents of privies and cesspools from city tenements. And yes, night soil is exactly what it sounds like. By city ordinance, you work while respectable folk sleep, hauling your sloshing barrels through narrow alleys, up creaking staircases, and into overcrowded courtyards. The smell. Imagine 1,000 unflushed toilets mixed with the stench of rotting food, dead animals, and whatever other horrors the tenants flushed down their makeshift toilets. Historians still argue whether the job was truly well paid, or if that was just a desperate justification for the horror. Some records show night soil collectors could earn more than skilled craftsmen, but at what cost? You couldn't spend those wages anywhere you weren't chased off by disgusted customers. And here's a quirky tidbit that might make you gag through time. The contents of your barrels weren't simply discarded. No, they were often processed into fertilizer, industrial grade. Of course, meaning the food that graced upper-class tables may have grown from the very waste you collected. You navigate your route in silence, the streets damp with fog, and the faint glow of gas lights casting eerie shadows. You learn to move quietly, quickly, invisibly. No one wants to see you or smell you. And God forbid you spill a barrel. The disaster is immediate, the cleanup backbreaking, and the humiliation unmatched. Your work is dangerous too. The carts are heavy, the staircases slick, the cesspits treacherous. One misstep, one loose board, and you could tumble into the very pit you're trying to empty. And let's not even talk about the explosions. Methane gas building up in sealed cesspits could ignite from a stray lantern flame. There are tales of entire streets rocked by such accidents, though whether they're exaggerated or not, you'd rather not test them. You carry a rag soaked in vinegar to hold over your mouth, but it's little comfort. The stench seeps through everything. Your clothes, your skin, even your dreams. Yet like the gong farmers of medieval times, you take a grim pride in your work. Without you, the city would drown in its own waste. You are the unsung hero of sanitation, even if the songs are mostly muttered curses hurled from curtained windows. And when your shift ends, you haul your cart to the dumping ground outside the city limits, washing it down as best you can, though the smell never fully fades. You might even manage a laugh with a fellow collector, sharing a crude joke about how you're both feeding the city from the bottom up. Because, in the end, someone has to do it. And tonight, that someone is you. You abandon the night soil cart, only to find yourself under dazzling chandeliers, velvet curtains, and applause. But don't get too comfortable. You are now a castrato singer in 18th century Italy, your soaring soprano voice, the pride of the opera house. But the price for your angelic notes, an unspeakable sacrifice made in childhood, the loss of your manhood to preserve that perfect, ethereal tone. You live a life of contradiction, adored on stage, pitied or mocked off it. Your voice fills gilded theaters, sending duchesses into swoons. Yet you cannot walk the streets without whispers, giggles, and the occasional cruel jest. Historians still argue whether castrati were truly willing participants or tragic victims of an ambitious, merciless system. Officially, the church forbade castration, but unofficially, it turned a blind eye when it came to preserving the voice of God. Many boys came from poor families, sold to the dream of riches and fame. Others, perhaps more naive victims of greedy maestros. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some castrati achieved rock star status, commanding astronomical fees, receiving gifts, love letters, and even propositions from the elite. Yet they often lived isolated, lonely lives, forever caught between worlds, neither fully male nor female, idolized, yet incomplete. You practice tirelessly, knowing your voice is your only currency in a world that would otherwise discard you. You perfect your trills, your vibrato, your breath, control. You wear the finest silks, the most extravagant wigs, your appearance as carefully curated as your repertoire. But behind the velvet masks and powdered faces, you carry the heavy truth. You will never marry. You will never father children. Some castrati adopted personas of aloofness. Others turned bitter, their fame a hollow shield against the gnawing void of what was taken from them. Yet, as you step onto the stage, the orchestra swelling beneath you, the audience breathless in anticipation, you feel powerful. In this moment, your voice silences every critic, every sneer, every whisper. You are untouchable, divine immortal. Still, when the curtains fall and the applause fades, you walk back to your lavish but empty chambers. You sip sweet wine, stare at your reflection, and wonder who you might have been had the knife not stolen your future for the sake of art. But tomorrow night, the show goes on. The applause fades, and once more you descend into darkness. This time, beneath the streets of Paris, into the twisting, stinking labyrinth of the city's sewers. You are a Parisian sewer cleaner, a worker of the underworld in the 19th century, navigating tunnels few dare to think about, let alone enter. You light your lantern, its weak glow casting long shadows on the damp stone walls. The air is thick with the scent of human waste, rotting food, and something else, something you can't quite place, but that clings to your skin, your lungs, your soul. Historians still argue whether these sewer workers were unsung heroes or invisible pariahs. In truth, they were both. The city depended on them to keep the sewers flowing, yet no one invited them to dinner. They became phantoms in their own city, only emerging into daylight when absolutely necessary. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some sewer cleaners, navigated by touch and memory, alone mapping the city's underbelly in their minds. There are stories of men who knew the sewers better than the streets above, able to tell their location by the flow of the water, the tilt of the tunnels, or the stench in the air. You trudge through ankle-deep sludge, the rats scurrying past like old friends. You learn to spot the telltale glimmer of gas pockets, the dangerous buildup of methane that, if sparked by your lantern, could turn the tunnel into an inferno. The work is back-breaking, shoveling blockages, clearing collapsed tunnels, unclogging ancient pipes choked with a century's worth of filth. You pull out dead animals, sometimes even dead bodies, unwanted, forgotten. dumped into the city's gut. You crack jokes with your fellow workers to keep the gloom at bay, inventing nicknames for each other, like Mire King or Baron of Sludge. It's gallows humor, but it's all you have. You even develop a sense of pride. After all, Paris above can shine only because Paris below flows. But the risks are constant. Collapse disease, drowning in filth. And yet you return each day, your lantern swinging, your shovel ready. And when you emerge, blinking into the daylight, tourists stroll above, unaware that beneath their feet, you've just unclogged the artery that keeps the city alive. You wipe the sweat from your brow, the stink never truly leaving you, and you smile a grim, knowing smile, because without you, Paris would drown in its own beauty. You might think, after all you've endured, the final job on this tour of history's worst careers would offer a sliver of dignity. But no, you find yourself back at the execution grounds, not as the executioner this time, but as their assistant. And if you thought wielding the axe was bad, cleaning up after it is an entirely new level of misery. Your job begins the moment the axe falls. While the crowd cheers or jeers, you are the one tasked with collecting the severed heads, scrubbing the blood from the scaffold, and disposing of the remains. It's a job no one wants to think about, but someone has to do it, and that someone, once again, is you. Historians still argue whether executioners' assistants were apprentices learning the craft, or simply the lowest rung on the gallows hierarchy. Either way, you're not winning any popularity contests in the town square. Here's a quirky tidbit to lighten the mood, if such a thing is possible. In some places, executioners' assistants had the side gig of selling the hair teeth, or even blood of the executed, believed to have medicinal or magical properties. Imagine that on your resume. You move quickly, silently collecting the head, which still drips warm, thick blood into your bucket. You clean the block, scrubbing furiously, knowing the crowd expects the next execution to be spotless. No one wants to see the mess beneath the show. But the psychological toll, that's harder to scrub away. You dream of the faces you carry, the hollow-eyed stares, frozen in their final moment. You learn to detach, to joke, to hum to yourself as you bury the remains in the unmarked graves beyond the town walls. Your clothes are stained, your skin never truly clean. You sleep in a shack on the edge of the executioner's property, as far from the townsfolk as possible. Children whisper that you talk to the heads at night, and perhaps in your loneliest hours you do. Still, the job is steady if soul-crushing, and someone has to do it, because even the grim theater of death requires stagehands. You sigh, washing your hands in a bucket of cold water, the crimson swirling like smoke. Tomorrow, the gallows will be raised again. And you'll be there, mop in hand, ready to do the work no one else will face. And now, as the echoes of screams fade, the lanterns flicker low, and the last gruesome chore is done. You step away from the scaffold. The air is cooler now, softer somehow, as if the night itself has grown weary of horror. You lean against the wooden post, staring up at the moon, and let your breathing slow. It's over for tonight, at least. Your muscles ache, your head swims, but in the quiet hum of the sleeping town, something shifts. The world softens. The distant hoot of an owl replaces the clamor of the crowd. The sweet scent of damp earth begins to push back against the stench of blood and smoke. You let your eyes close, if only for a moment, imagining a gentler world where your hands are clean, your tasks lighter, your burdens shared. The moonlight wraps around you like a blanket, the silence cradling your weary heart. And in that space between waking and sleep, you let the horrors of the day dissolve like shadows chased away by the rising sun. You remind yourself that even in the darkest tunnels, the dirtiest jobs, the loneliest duties, there's still a spark of human resilience, of stubborn survival. Tomorrow will come, and with it, the same cruel tasks. But for now, you can rest. Breathe in, breathe out. Let the the city fade. You did your job grim as it was. Now let sleep take you far, far away from the blood, the filth, and the stink. Good night, brave traveler of the worst jobs in history. Sleep well.